Welcome back everyone to our quest to be better resellers by researching. And today's topic is women's belts. Now we talked about men's belts a couple weeks ago and have learned some things. In my own thrifting, I've applied already and managed to find and do pretty well with. And so we're gonna do the same with women's belts. Now, I started researching women's belts and I was like, oh my goodness. It took me a little longer to get this video put together because I didn't want it to be like 2 hours long. I kind of wanted to be able to consolidate it into the most helpful information. And I just realized though that there is, compared to men's belts, was a little overwhelming. There's so many belts listed in women's category. And we're talking like I would research like clothing, women's accessories, belts, and I would just look into that category. And there's so many more brands. There's so much more competition. At one point I looked and there was 190,000 listings for women's belts, 34,000 sold. Now the reason I had dialed it down to the accessories belt category is a lot of times clothing pieces with belts will show up in the results. So if you kind of narrow that down. There's also the clothing, specialty, vintage, women's accessories. You know, you can dial it down into the vintage categories as well and find some results there. So 190,000 listings, but only 34,000 sold. So at first glance, you might be like, I don't know if women's belts are the way to go. Definitely, that's always going to be your decision. What your sell-through rate thresholds are, what your selling price thresholds are. So this is just, as always, my research videos are just the starting point for doing your own research into that and what's available in your area. So I've sold women's belts before. You've probably have as well. So what is it about the ones that have sold that maybe we could kind of pick out some common features or factors or things like that that would help us to get those belts sold faster, or just be smarter about what we're sourcing for belts. Right off the bat, when I looked at solds, many of the solds, you know, you can start with just the highest to lowest, and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars with precious metals and, you know, all sorts of bling and high-end designer names attached to it. So a lot of times with the whole big category like that, I drop it down to like $200 and less or $100 and less. So even in those, many of the solds in that range are still designer. And so we're talking like the bigger names like Gucci and Chanel and Burberry, Dolce & Gabbana, Hermes, things like that. And even among those belts, the ones that sold the best were, I would call them like logo belts. And so the buckle might be like a D and G for Dolce & Gabbana, or it's a big H for Hermes. And so, you know, in the designers, a lot of people want people to know that they're wearing the designer. So a lot of designer clothing is all about that logo and that bling. So that's good to know. So, you know, all the research videos, our highest selling items in those, in any category that we've talked about, have usually been designers, and we kind of just accept that, right? So do your due diligence. If you come across something like a Burberry belt, do your due diligence, see if it's real, if it's a good price. I'm sure you'll do pretty well with it. The next category that I saw was selling the best and the highest, right under designer, and sometimes right up there with the designers, are Western style belts, or actual Western belts with sterling buckles and hardware, especially Native American made silverware, like the Native American silversmiths is what I want to say. So for example, this is just a tiny example of something that I found. It was on just a ratty belt. The belt was nothing to look at. And that might have helped the belt kind of slip through the radar at the thrift store. But it had this small buckle. I'll put a picture up. I just ended up selling just the buckle. It was by a Navajo artist, and I sold it for $100 on Ruby Lane. So, so just keep that in mind. So that's another category that's going to be up there with like the highest amounts that we're gonna see. Okay, but setting those aside, if we set aside the high-end designer brands and the sterling belt buckle Western Native American designed belts, those might be few and far between. There's something very important that I came to realize as I culled through all the research that I did, and that is style, the uniqueness, the quality of the belt sometimes is more important than the name that's on it. Some belts I saw didn't have any name on it and they still sold for $150 or more based on their style and their uniqueness. So we are going to talk about some brands today. We're going to look at some examples. But they're overall, besides those designer brands, there were very few that I looked at that I said, oh, that's a great brand. I would pick it up every time I found it. So it's going to be more important to look at the overall look of the belt when you're doing your sourcing. So this is something that I've decided is going to guide my sourcing of women's belts. It actually can kind of, a lot of different categories I think it could apply to as well, especially in women's clothing. So there are some common factors when you're looking across all these different brands. For example, Brighton, we're going to talk about Brighton a little bit. We come across Brighton, I come across it a lot. And so I'm not ever going to say, oh, Brighton is the best belt brand, pick it up every time you see it. That's not going to happen. I've sold a Brighton belt for $10. Yes, it's sold, but that's not really the goal belt that I'm going to be looking for. But there are certain styles of Brighton that after doing this research, I'm like, oh, this is good to know. I will look for that particular style. So here's some common factors that we can talk about for belts in general across all the brands. So first of all, Western style. So we talked about the Western with the high-end, nice sterling hardware on it. This is more like Brighton does a Western style belt. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's Ralph Lauren, if it's Brighton. The biggest money in those brands are Western style right now. So it also pays to pay attention, especially with something like this, to pay attention to trends. Are wide belts in right now or skinny belts in right now? But what I was seeing in the top selling items were just Western style belts, especially with conchos. So those like Southwestern style metal ovals can be called conchos. I'll put a picture up here. And especially when they go all the way around the belt. So that was where the biggest money was in a lot of the brands, were Western style belts. Then there are exotic materials. We talked about this with the men's belt. So look for the high quality, look for nice leathers, look for the crocodile and the ostrich and the different things like that. It could be by a maker you've never even heard of before, but it's a nice quality exotic leather. And I even saw in a comment made by someone about selling belts is that they shopped by feel. So all the belts are hanging and they would just kind of feel like, you can feel like a Walmart belt is like cracking and it's like super brittle and stiff or whatever, but then you feel a nice leather belt and it might be worth taking a look at. And it doesn't have to be leather. A lot of the belts I saw that were selling for nice prices were they were chains, they were links, they were, all sorts of different kinds of materials. Now, the next one is something that probably is the most important to me. It's kind of guided my shopping up till now. As I dug through my profit pile of belts, I noticed that I had done this quite often. Some of them weren't worth a ton, but I always tended to grab like an eye-catching belt, especially in vintage. Like the 80s were good about their big old exciting belts and different colors and things like that. So statement belts, anything eye-catching, Chico's, we'll see one of my solds later, but Chico's, I see Chico's belts quite often, and our best-selling Chico's belt was wide, it was embroidered, it had a huge buckle, very eye-catching, very statement-like. And I've even seen, we'll take a look later, is some 80s no-name belts we're selling for really good money. Okay, so then the last thing we want to talk about or think about is if it's a solid clothing brand. We said the same thing with the men's belts. If it's a solid clothing brand or name, something that when you see it, you're like, oh, I'm going to sell that. If they have a belt, it might be worth checking. So, and I emphasize checking it, okay? Because like the other day, I went to our little clearance thrift store, and they just dumped a bunch of belts. Like I looked through all the belts, bought some, picked some out, and then she came and dumped a bunch more. And so I went back and looked more, and I found this Lily Pulitzer little fabric belt. Now, when you look at comps are not so great, right? It's a name people look for and all that. Comps are just kind of so-so for these little cotton fabric belts. Now, I'm sure I will sell it. If I price it down $12, $15, it'll probably sell. So it's not an absolute like, oh, that's a great brand, let me check the belts. Let me just pick up the belt. Now this one I paid pennies for, so I probably would pick this up. And the other option is when I was researching, a lot of times people lot belts up together. So they're either getting a bunch of belts at the bins and then selling them off in reselling lots, or people are using them for crafts, or people are using them for different things like that. So I could take, some more little kind of preppy fabric belts from like the 90s or whatever. I could put them all together in a lot and just try to sell them off together. And that could be an option. That might be a better use of my time. But let's pop over to the computer now, and we're going to look at some examples of some of these brands. Some brands you've heard of, and then some brands, maybe to just kind of put on your radar. And again, but keep those factors in mind within the brands of what you want to be looking for. So let's go take a look at that. Okay, so we're going to start with a good brand. We're going to start with St. John. So yeah, kind of maybe technically could fit in with like the designer, but it's still not crazy high end. And it might be something you come across. And especially since the logo for St. John is sometimes a logo that people don't really know. I'm going to put an example of the logo up here. And it's just interesting. I ended up finding a St. John belt online by another seller, and I bought it at a fairly low price. I'm not sure that they knew the logo, but I ended up, it was a chain belt. I'll show you an example later, or if I can find my sold, I'll put up a screenshot. But I had ended up selling mine for $80. The logo is good to know, because the logo is also found sometimes on jewelry. So you might find earrings that don't have St. John spelled out anywhere, but they have the logo, or even on necklaces or things like that. So I've had that happen before as well, and have sold St. John jewelry at a very good price. So if we look at St. John belt, we've got 378 results for that. We're going to pop it. I'm not going to restrict. Wow, it's far down. I'm not going to restrict pricing or anything on these brands. But if we look at solds, we've got 159 results in solds, but we're at highest to lowest. And so the highest, we can see this chain belt sold for $319. We have another one with tags that sold for $305. Here's a one with the medallions are an ivory color instead of black. One with tassels. Okay, so we see them, a lot of chain belts, very popular with this style. Then, well, there's a leather one, so that's nice. I'm trying to get down to the example that was similar to the one I sold. And I have that logo up because, okay, here, the one I had, I think looked like this, very similar. You can see the logo there on some of the black pieces, and it doesn't, once you know what it is, when you look at it, you can make out the S and the J. But anyway, that one sold for, an offer was accepted, of less than $145. But I wanted to be sure to mention St. John because if you see the chains or things like that, or if you see that logo, that might be one. It's definitely one to keep an eye out for. Now, another brand we're going to be happy to find is Ralph Lauren, because we talked about Ralph Lauren in the men's video, and we've got over 2,500 results listed for Ralph Lauren belts. So in the women's, you're going to find, like I find Ralph Lauren belts. Obviously that's a lower end, but again, depending on style, you'll find Western, you'll find equestrian style belts, all can do pretty well. I think I'll pop up right now. I did have a sale on Poshmark of a Ralph Lauren belt, and I'll pop that up here so you can see. But we'll also take a look at solds. We've got 1,200 plus solds, and we're again highest to lowest. Now, there are some Ralph Lauren belts that have sterling buckles. They're going to be at the top. But it's like I mentioned before, we've got Western styles right here as the top most valuable. Here's conchos on that belt, Western style, $700. Here's an equestrian looking one. The buckle is like a stirrup and it's tooled leather. This one, the belt buckle is the horse heads, and I guess it originally sold for $700. So that's probably going to be the Ralph Lauren line, not like Polo Ralph Lauren or anything like that. But again, we see a lot of Western style belts in those top numbers. This one, anniversary, 50th anniversary belt. That's interesting. And very statement, eye-catching. This one's kind of plain looking, but look at what we've got. We've got an alligator belt with a sterling buckle. So exotic, like we mentioned. Another tooled leather one, another alligator one. This one, anything the wide, this is double RL Ralph Lauren, which is a good line of the Ralph Lauren, in the Ralph Lauren brand. But they, anything that wide, lots of buckles, lots of straps, things like that. We've got a mother of pearl, looks like a mother of pearl buckle, and lizard, whether it's imprinted or whatever it is. Okay, so a lot of those factors we talked about in the beginning, very statement, eye-catching, Western. The equestrian, specifically to Ralph Lauren, we have this one, they call it, they use kidney belt. You could probably also use girdle, corset belt, and exotic leathers. Okay, so Ralph Lauren's like this little example of all those factors that I talked about. So let's go on to Brighton. I don't know about you. If you want to leave me a comment below, I find Brighton fairly often. And if we look, there's like 7,000 listed. So I think it's prolific, right? Some of the companies that we're talking about, they're like clothing companies, and then they might do a few belts, right? So there just might not be as many. But then there's some companies where they went hard into the accessories. And so there's just Brighton, they did a lot of leather. So they did belts and they did shoes and they did purses. And remember, I sold a Brighton picture frame. So we've got lots of results for Brighton, but we're going to pop down to solds. We're going to make sure we're going highest to lowest to see what the best, because plenty of Brighton belts will sell for $20 or less, right? If we really went and looked deep at that. Okay, here's one of those lots of belts somebody put together. But we have a new with tags Brighton belt with conchos. Accepted an offer from 150. Another Western concho belt, a Brighton heart rhinestone belt. There's another lot. Here's some more conchos, Western. Okay, so Brighton, there is going to be a limit even at the top. You know, it's the level of quality at the top. We're not seeing much over like $200 or anything like that. So it's going to be lower than that. Most will probably sell, you know, below, like we just said, a lot will sell at $20 or whatever. But if you can find the Western style ones, you know, you might look at it and get all excited. It's like, oh, it's a Western belt. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, it's just Brighton. But it's definitely worth picking up. You know, it's a very common style that keeps repeating of what ends up selling. So now they did 10 belts, 10 Brighton belts in sizes large, extra large, and 2X, sold for $75. That's very interesting, especially if you have access to the bins. Now this one has a leather flower on it, belt or necklace, I guess. More Western style ones. Here's one with just hearts. Very kind of classic. These are kind of classic Brighton decoration, $72. That was new with tags, I believe. But again, we're seeing those factors. We're seeing the Western and we're seeing the statement looking belts, but definitely heavy on the Western. Bunch of crystal hearts, very blingy on that one. This one's studded, kind of still has that Western look to it. 5 Brighton belts, Western style, but not overly over the top. And they got in like the $60 range, and they're like 1 small, 2 medium, 2 medium large, and 2 reversible. Okay, I think that adds up to more than 5, or maybe out of those, 2 of them are reversible. Okay, I'm confused. But anyway, people are lotting up Brighton belts. Very interesting. That might be a resale lot that they're putting together for someone. Let's pop over to another brand I feel like I find very often. Chico's, again, over 3,000 available for sale. So let's narrow it down. I mean, Chico's is, I will admit, usually pretty statement-like anyway. So this one might be a little trickier to find ones that are valuable out of them, because there's a lot that are listed. Okay, we start off with another lot. Here's a concho belt, $75, right? So we're starting off, we're not starting off super high in the solds. It drops down to 63 for a concho belt. This one's studded rhinestone, fake snakeskin, but very Western looking, very, what do you call it, rodeo. Here's some other big statement looking ones. That one's really cool. I would pick that one up. And this one I see a few times, like a geode slice belts with that accent. And big buckles on the Chico's ones seem to do pretty well. That one's just a nice, I feel like I've sold that one before. I don't remember. I feel like I've seen it. And I'm trying to find, here's mine. Okay, so this one recently sold for us, Chico's boho. This beaded, it's like, you know, it's beads all around it, and the buckle was pretty eye-catching, and we sold that for $40. Okay, so they're not going to be super high value on the Chico. I mean, I was totally happy to get $40 for that Chico's belt, but there are a lot of kind of so-so Chico's belts that are out there. So just taking a look at some of these ones that did sell. Here's another beaded one with a leather tassel, but we're down in like the 30s and 20 range right now. Okay, so there's another factor that we can talk about that I was thinking too as far as improving sell-through rate. I was taking a look at Brighton because there's so many Brighton belts listed. Let me just pop this up for a second. So there's a lot of Brighton belts listed. And what was I going to say? Oh, so if you want to increase your sell-through rate on a brand like that, find belts in larger sizes. So in Brighton, when I switched it from to extra large only, the sell-through rate all of a sudden was 100%. So that's just something also to keep in mind. Okay. Now let's go to another brand that we might come across. This one is Fossil. Again, 3,400 results. We're in women's accessories, women's belts. And Fossil, I think I have one in my little profit pile that needs to be listed. You're seeing this is definitely, you know, going to be the $20 range or whatever. Unless you have something amazing. We have only 762 in solds, but if we go to highest to lowest, Tory Birch, we have no idea what that's all about. A couple lots. Now we have a tooled leather belt by Fossil, but it's pink. They use Coastal Cowgirl. They used Y2K. We have 3 Fossil belts put together. And then look, we have a concho belt and another kind of Western concho kind of looking thing. Here we go with some more concho belts. Detecting a theme. And I'm also happy to be living out west, and I'm wondering if I will find stuff like this a little bit more often. You know, I might not have like necessarily before this been like, I would have been like, it's Fossil, right? But that might be just what it needs to kind of put it over the edge as far as making it like a $30-$40 sale. This one's interesting. It's got the key hole on it like Fossil bags do, the keeper bags, or the, you know, the ones they had the little key hanging on them. There's another concho. This one's just a nice white like stitched one. So again, if it kind of catches your eye, this one's kind of basic too. It's just studded. You know, other factors come into play. These patchwork ones, I can see a patchwork, leather patchwork one being popular right now. Very festival, very boho. You know, other factors do come into play. Your pictures and your feedback and all sorts of things. Why your belt might get picked over someone else's. Now this one's nice. You know, it's like a distressed kind of pastel looking. That kind of stands out as a little bit different. So they all kind of stand out in these better pricing ones. They stand out as a little bit different. Another brand, which I think is mostly, there's not many on eBay for women. I think you'll find this brand more often than the men's, but it's Diesel. And so again, it's just one of those, I did sell a Diesel belt. I'm going to put it up because I can't remember what platform I sold it on, but it was made in Italy. It was a nice looking belt. And so I listed it, and you'll see the price when I put it up there. It might have sold on Poshmark. I'm not positive. But Diesel, a lot of times you can find things that are very like 90s and Y2K with this brand. That could be why we're getting some of the good prices on this. We've got 50 results in solds. So there was definitely more belts in the men's section for this brand. But there's only 50 to go through. But if we go to the highest, we have this Y2K low rise wide leather Diesel belt sold for $85. These have a Diesel logo on the buckle. Made in Italy. Here's another nice wide made in Italy brown one. The big grommets, that's like so Y2K, so 90s, the big holes in the belts. Okay, so you get the idea. Look for the name, look for the very Y2K 90s look to it. Or if it's a nicer, more subdued looking Diesel belt, look for that leather that's made in Italy. And you could probably get a pretty good price on that. Now, next up, I took a quick look at some of the Western brands that are not, you know, not where they'd have like a Navajo buckle or something on it, but but the cowboy boot brands, right? The Ariat, the Justin, the Fry, Lucchese, things like that. So Ariat, they have 540 belts listed. You know, we're definitely going to have Western style belts in this brand. We've got 242, you know, maybe about half, 50% sell through. Some are just kind of plain looking, but here right at the top, 76, we've got this beaded, very southwestern, western style belt. Again, kind of blingy, rhinestone, cowgirl, whatchamacallit, rodeo. I don't know why the word rodeo keeps flying out of my head. We've got some turquoise in it. This one's got conchos. They're just square, very heavily tooled. So anything very, very Western looking is going to get you the better price. There's a nice concho belt. And then another brand is Fry. Not too many belts. You know, they do shoes, they do boots, bags, things like that. But Fry, we've got Frye. And Fry leather belts. We've got some good prices in the sold. Let's start at the top. Fringe belt with a ring buckle, 92. Some are new with tags right here at the top, but let's see if I can find, if I can't find something really quick, I'll throw up the Fry logo. I think maybe you can see it in this one. Yeah, here we go. Boy. It's kind of hard to make out. So I'll probably still pop it up there. But sometimes you see this little logo on the side of boots or shoes if you can't see it, you know, printed, spelled out somewhere else. So that's good to know that logo. And then I just did a quick search for Lucchese because those boots sell really well. There's only there's only 30 results under Lucchese belt. Under women, but we can, you know, if you look under men, there's a lot more. And some of these belts look like they could be worn, you know, by men or women, but it just depends on maybe sizing, you know, things like that, how they were officially marketed. There's only 9 results and solds for women, but the prices are pretty good. So I would probably pick it up if I saw it, no matter what. But that's just me. Now, speaking of Western belts, we talked about this brand. In the men's belts, and I kind of have a funny story because when I talked about it, you know, we were looking at the brands that were selling the highest in men's, and BB Simon kept coming up, and I'm like, I've never heard that before, but we were looking, and like it was they're over the top, right? The really high priced ones have rhinestones, they have Swarovski crystals. They're very, very Western looking. They're very rodeo, cowgirl, things like that. And what I forgot to do, because I didn't really think I would come across it. And I was like, or if I did, like everyone here out west would like know what they were, or, you know, would have it priced high. So you see this, we've got, you know, BB Simon, and some of the men's prices were really good, but like women's, we've got this just covered in crystals, like $300, right? So you can see how blingy these belts are. Well, when I was researching it with the men's, I didn't even look at what the mark was. I just assumed it said BB Simon. So I'm shopping at my, not Goodwill, local thrift store. And I end up looking at this belt, and I think I had seen it before. Okay. So I am looking at this belt. It's very interesting. It's like, it's a metal. It's like a wire mesh, but also imprinted with like a floral pattern on it and everything. So definitely Western. There's some wear on the silver plate, but it has a couple like rhinestones in here. And there are some condition issues. Because it's metal, I think there's some rust spots that I have to see if like a steel wool will take those out. But I had looked at it, and the mark was kind of faded. And I don't even know if the quality of this camera is good enough for this, but it's like right in here. And it's really faded. It's hard for me to even see. And I couldn't even make out that it said Simon. Now I could see it, but like at the store, I was just like, it looked like it said S-I-N-G-H, like sing. And I was like, I should look that up. And I either did or didn't, but it ended up not, you know, not like clicking in my brain at all. And so I didn't get it that day. I got an Escada belt that day, and I talked about that in my live the other day. But I was back at that thrift store, and this was still hanging there, and so I'm working my way through all the belts again. And I see it, and I'm like, I should really figure out what this says. And then all of a sudden I realize it says Simon. And I'm like, And above it in tiny little, so I took a picture with my phone and then enlarged it. That's my little magnifying trick at the thrift store. And I enlarged it, and it said Belts by Simon. And I'm like, Belts by Simon, B.B. Simon. I'm like, are we serious? So that's how B.B. Simon things are marked. They're marked Belts by Simon. So at first I looked at it, and I was like, are they even the same thing? And so anyway, I think they are the same thing. So I went over to BB Simon listings. I found a sold. I looked at their mark, and I was like, oh, that's totally what it is. So I picked it up anyway. Not that I think this is going to be a crazy high dollar one. Like I said, I've got that condition issue that I have to see if it'll clean up. And definitely if we look at what we were looking at, it's the real blingy ones that are getting you, the highest amount. So this might end up being, if I can get it clean, $25 or $30 or something like that. But it is a brand to keep in mind. And as I was researching, I came across another one like it. This name Kippies also came up. Again, Swarovski crystal. I just wanted to throw the name out there for you, but double check, the quality of it. Like this one, like it just feels really nice, right? It doesn't feel like some Walmart belt that got blinged out. I don't know. It's hard to describe it. It's really nice feeling. Okay, same thing. Look for the bling. Next up, I wanted to show what I did one time just for fun, because I love vintage. We love selling vintage here. A lot of the belts I end up picking up, especially at the bins for a couple pennies, are just kind of vintage, no name, whatever. But if we go over to clothing, we're looking at the category clothing, specialty, then vintage accessories, belts. So some people put their vintage belts into this category. You can also put it into the main women's accessories category and just check the box that says vintage. I've been told it's better to do that than to kind of hide it away in the specialty category. I don't know. I haven't done my research on that. So we're going to skip over this 18 karat belt. And we've got Chanel. Okay, we've got our usual big names. We've got a turquoise leather sterling belt that sold. It got bid up pretty high. We've got a 70s Gucci. Here's one of those sterling silver concho belts signed JH, so no doubt Native American. Then we've got Shriner. Shriner is a big name in jewelry, vintage jewelry, and so now I know to look for belts as well. Celine, Donna Karan. So exciting. That one's nice. That one's, somewhere in that $300 range. That's awesome. I also saw quite a few of these in the higher numbers. In the 70s, it was kind of a thing to do these belts with the very Victorian looking, with the hands are like this, that clasp together as the buckle. Miss Ellen Ruth Levy, New York City. There's a few of these we'll see. It spells out love along it says it's from the 80s. but along the belt it spells out the word love. Judith Lieber, same thing. I've sold jewelry by her. That can be, you know, a good name to be on the lookout for, not just in accessories, but also in jewelry. Ferragamo, a Taxco sterling silver belt. Oh, that reminds me. I got to show you another brand that you need to know about too. Okay. That one slipped my mind. This one's fur. Here's a couple more of the Miss Ellen Ruth Levy, New York City. It looks like it's ostrich, snakeskin. Escada. Here we go with the Escada. So we'll talk about Escada in a minute. Christian Dior. A whole big lot of 33 belts for 190. That's nice. Now look at this one. This is kind of what I referenced at the beginning. A fabulous vintage 80s gold tone lion's head belt. So, like, I don't know. I didn't open it. I didn't, you know, I would assume that if there was a brand, they would have put it in the title. But look at the statement-ness of that belt. Like, that's going to catch someone's attention. And it got a good price even without a big name being attached to it. Here's another Escada, another Escada. Miriam Haskell, again, another jewelry. Big name in the jewelry community. Streets Ahead. So this is interesting. This name comes up quite a bit too. 90s, 80s, Streets Ahead. And I have to admit something. I just sold an Escada belt, but I know I have another one, and I know I have a Streets Ahead belt because I remember buying them. And I had one spot where all my belts were. As I bought a belt, I had this bin that I was putting belts in, and those two belts are not in there. So I either have another stash somewhere, which I've already looked all over for it, or they're in a hard goods bin that we haven't gotten to yet, or they're in a clothing bin we haven't gotten to yet, just kind of maybe buried at the bottom. But it's like driving me crazy because I'm like, I've got Streets Ahead. I don't remember what it looks like. It could just be kind of basic or plain. But I've got a Streets Ahead. I know I have another Escada belt because I bought it at an antique mall for like $5. Ay. Okay, St. John. And we already started that. Pierre Cardin, but very statement looking, right? Christian Dior. Yeah, and if you want to, here's another Lion medallion gold chain medallion belt, $150. They don't put the brand up top. Here's a belt they say is from the 40s. We've got, okay, here's an 80s leather metal brass embossed cobra snake belt. So see that? Again, maybe not even a big name on it. Here's some more Escada. Oh, and then Renoir. This is good. This one's good too. So Renoir was a mid-century copper jewelry. So there's Renoir and there's Matisse, and these are like copper belts. I thought there was another one close by. Here's one. Copper chain, like a cinch belt. Okay, those are going for good prices as well. Here's a nice picture, right? 50s Matisse Renoir modernist copper belts. Here's an example of what some of them look like. $110. So they put the ad there. So very, very interesting. Let's pop over. I was going to show you Escada, ESCADA. A lot of these, the vintage ones will be West Germany. So 80s. And let's look at solds real quick. These are just, let's look at ended recently, because then I can show you the one I sold. So I talked about my Escada belt find at our live that we did recently. And there it is. That's the one I sold. So I sold mine for $90. It did have a scratch on the buckle when I finally took a closer look at it and everything. So $90 for that. I paid, what did I tell you in the live? I don't even know. $5 or something like that at the thrift store. It was either 5 and then half off. Yeah, it was 5 and then half off that day. So $250. So fun. $90 for that. And then, and that sold like in a day. So just keep that in mind. Here's the Streets Ahead look. You can see what these belts look like. Again, very kind of big statement. Look at that one with the clock. I don't remember if mine is just a plain kind of like that one. Man, I wish I could find them. Don't be me, guys. Organize your inventory. Okay, $60. Are we starting at the highest? No, these are just ended recently. But anyway, let's just take a look at it. Medallions, $85 for just this kind of, it's kind of Western looking, but still, right? So bigger money on the blingier ones, but $54 for just a kind of a plain one. Okay, that's Streets Ahead, and I gotta find, oh, I'm gonna talk to you about a belt I found that I'm excited about. So I'm going to, I guess, pop this up. I'm sorry, the quality of this camera, I don't know if something had changed. Maybe you guys are like, no, you're blurry like this all the time. But anyway, I should just get a camera. I should invest, right, in my channel and get a better camera. When I'm using my phone, it's a little bit of a better camera, but sometimes it just feels like my computer does better than other times. So when I went to the bins the other day, I picked up this belt. Like I said, it was the same day I got the Lily Pulitzer. She was popping out some new belts. So I went over and I saw this one, and it's really cool because it's like split, but then attached. And I grabbed it because, well, I would have grabbed it anyway for pennies, but it is marked State of Claude, Montana. Now I knew Claude, Montana. I knew the state of Claude, Montana because it's connected. There's also Vogue, large format Vogue patterns with Claude, Montana that I have sold before. And I think it's funny. I know brands based on sewing patterns, Vogue sewing patterns, not because of clothing, because I am not a clothing person. I am not a fashion person. But it's in really, really good condition. And Claude, Montana, I mean, this is just so cool. So then I was like, I wonder what that's going to be worth. And so I look in eBay currently, Claude, Montana belt. I've got one belt here. Let's see. I think it says made in Italy. So that's a little bit different. They're asking $261. Mine does not say anywhere where it is made. It just says it's size small, state of Claude, Montana. I mean, I'm assuming it's leather. Then we have a Claude, Montana from the UK for $50. That's like bright red. And that's it. And then if you go into solds, there are not that many, like there's none, okay? And then if you go over to Terapeak, which if you go up here to my eBay and you come down to where it says selling, you click on that. This is how I get to it. You click on that, you come to your seller hub, which gives you your overview and all your orders and things that you can work from. And over here on the research tab, we've got Terapeak product research. I put in Claude, Montana belt for the past 3 years. And again, we're getting lots of clothing pieces with belts, like leather coats and things like that. But we've got, let's see, here's a leather belt, again, I think made in France or something like that. Sold for $28. We have a men's black leather belt sold for $30. And then we have this wide black leather belt made in France for $150. Just not a lot out there. And I think I went to WORTHPOINT and there was just a couple on there. So I don't know. You got to leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think I should price that at. Oh, yeah, I hate those kinds of decisions. Then, I didn't have this queued up, and I hope you guys are still with me because I know this is a long video. Oh wait, no, I want to go to eBay. Okay, I'm going to go just one more little bonus belt to know about. It's also jewelry. So the name is Sergio Gutierrez. And his style is this chainmail liquid metal style. There are, if you can get a better picture, so there's like bracelets. I had a belt. Here's a nice, oh, that's a bracelet. That's a bracelet. But as you can see, the prices are pretty good. $195 for that. So let's throw the word belt in there. And so what cracked me up, here we go. We got some high prices. I think I sold mine for like, oh, nobody has sold one. Interesting. Okay, so you might want to ignore me on this, but I did sell mine for like $80 or $85 or yeah, $80 or something like that. So maybe people have theirs priced too high. Mine kind of looked like this. But anyway, I had it, like, we have a bin of clothes to dress up for our family. Like when we do like a family worship, we'll dress up in like Bible character clothes, or you know, the kids did it when they were younger. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Just this metal kind of mesh belt. It would work on a guy for, I don't know. I don't even know what time period, but we just had a dress up bin. And I had thrown it in there. And then I learned about it in the jewelry group I was in. Someone had sold the bracelet, and I'm like, I've seen that before. And the little marks on it, you know, said SG. And I was like, no way. So I pulled it out of that dress up bin and, no joke, listed it and sold it. Okay, so I still think it would sell. I would still pick it up. Maybe it's the bracelets and such that will sell a lot better. There are only a couple of the belts listed, as you can see, but it's just kind of a name, and a lot of times it's marked SG, and so you might not, you know, you might not recognize it. So here we go. Here's some of the bracelets, $75, $60, $48, things like that. Anyway, keep an eye out. Okay, so let's just summarize. Let's go someplace else to summarize. I'm going to summarize quickly because I realize this video is already way longer than I meant it to be. So I'm so sorry. Anyone who sticks with me, I hope you just put me on and work while I'm talking. Like I said, the category was overwhelming, but what we need to know is we need to look for Western with conchos. We need to look for anything eye-catching, statement. I did see something interesting. VENDOO, I've told you, has a blog. I also follow them on Instagram, and they made like a slide thing of like spring fashion things to look for. And one of the things that they mentioned were 80s statement belts as kind of being a thing for spring. So keep that in mind. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out for anything that catches your eye. It's just something different. Larger sizes. We saw on Brighton, the sell-through rate got better with that as well. Okay, so hopefully that helped you guys. Like I said, it was a huge topic to try to narrow down a little bit. Leave me a comment below about any successful belt flips that you've had. You know, and it can be lower prices if you want, like if, you know, doesn't have to be a knock it out of the park, but is there something in the belts that you find consistently works for you when you're listing them? And I will catch you guys another time. Bye.